Welcome to Integrated. This is the podcast where we seek to grow knowledge of God by coming to know ourselves and what we were made for. By bridging the gap between the intellect and the will, we have the capacity to understand our nature and grow as disciples of Christ, surrendering all that we are and all that we have to the truth. My name is Angela Erickson, and today I'm going to be talking about finances with my friend Rob Fatzinger and his wife Sam. I don't know if you've seen Rob on Twitter. You might see him lurking on there doing all kinds of stuff. I know his wife Sam is on Instagram too. I'll definitely post links so you can connect with them and their work once you are done listening to this episode. But Rob and Sam Fatzinger have a really incredible story. They are a family of 16. They have 14 kids, 12 biological children, and 2 children that they have been blessed to adopt as well. And here's the deal. They are debt-free. I know right now, even though we're not in a recession, at least that's what I've been told, a lot of us are really struggling to make ends meet, especially when it comes to things like groceries and other necessities. So I thought this would be a great time to sit down with Rob and Sam and talk about like how they did it. How did they secure financial independence, freedom from the system of constantly having bills to pay? I think it's so common now to live life in debt, to have multiple credit card debts and your mortgage, and you have to have the newest car, and you're making monthly payments. And that's what you're considering is like, can I make the monthly payment instead of, can I actually afford this? So we sat down to talk about them and their life, what strategies they use to save money, the type of community that they live in. Because here's the deal, you guys. It's like, we can strive for financial freedom, and we should. Actually, we have a duty to, because our money is not our own, it is God's. And when we're tied down by our, debts that we pay, we can't do the kinds of things that we ought to be doing to build up God's kingdom on earth. So we're not able to steward the money that He gifts us in a way that would be optimal, and in a way that we can help those communities that are underserved. But we also have to support each other. So, for example, I think about a lot of us homeschooling moms. There was one year we got together and had like a mini garage sale, I guess, at the school that we meet for our co-op. And we each brought all the things that we were looking to get rid of. And we picked through and took, I brought home a dehydrator from one of my friends that didn't want their dehydrator anymore. And guess what? I've been using it for the last week or so, dehydrating all kinds of fruits and vegetables. So doing things like that, sharing with each other, and then donating that stuff to great organizations like Sharing and Caring Hands here in Minneapolis, who's doing like amazing work. For any of you who are not familiar with Mary Jo Copeland, I think she's a living saint, honestly. And I don't say that readily. She is an incredible human being. But anyway, so we talked about the strategies that they use to secure financial freedom. They didn't really have much debt when they got married, which makes a big difference. But they certainly lived intentionally with their finances, and they didn't overspend with what they had. They lived very frugally, and they are still raising children on one income. And even now, Rob is already retired. So anyway, it was a great episode. I loved talking to them and hearing more about how they did what they did. They have a book, actually, and I'll link it in the bio or in the description box. But it's called A Catholic Guide to Spending Less and Living More, Advice from a Debt-Free Family of 16. So definitely check it out. Go buy it. I'll link it, at least the Amazon link here, and in case you're wanting more of the specifics. But too, I do have a little note about the episode. Rob and Sam's internet connection wasn't like great, and the recording platform I use as an internet-based connection. So unfortunately, even though what I use is supposed to sort of buffer against certain things happening with the audio, unfortunately, there is a little bit of a ringing when they're talking at certain moments, and sometimes it's a little bit worse than others. But overall, I don't think it's that bad. I just want to give you a heads up about it. Yes, I know that kind of background noise is there. I just wasn't able to filter that out. I didn't have a good way to do that. So I hope it doesn't take away too much from the interview, because it was a great interview and I enjoyed talking to them so much. So please let me know what you think. If you have a moment, please hit the like button, share, subscribe, and invite your friends to follow along with me on this journey as we seek to become more integrated at a time when I think so much is disintegrating. We need more integration now than ever before. So thanks so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And I hope you enjoy my interview with Rob and Sam Fatzinger. Thank you so much for coming back on to Integrated again. I know the first time we recorded, we had some audio issues. So I've been promising people an episode with you guys for like months now. But we're going to try this again and see if we can get a better audio quality so that it's easier on the ears. I mean, we know it's not going to be easy on the eyes, but easier on the ears would at least be nice, right? Right, Rob?
Amen.
I'm kidding.
I did my hair.
Well, it's so great to have you guys on today. We're going to talk about something that you guys are experts in, which is finances. One thing that is just so amazing about you guys have 14 kids and you guys are debt free. So you guys wrote this book called The Catholic Guide to Spending Less and Living More. Is that correct? Is that the title?
Yeah.
Yep. And then
good job.
You guys have been featured in so many different major news outlets. I mean, everybody from like Dave Ramsey's network, the Chris Hogan Show, to EWTN, to the Washington Post. I mean, you guys have been all over the map, sharing your story about how you guys gained financial freedom. So how did this start? Like when you guys first got married, were you guys both debt free, or did either one of you had debt when you first got married? Because I think a lot of us, we start our marriages either with some financial baggage, so to speak, or the ones who seem to really build a trajectory of wealth early on are the people who don't have any debt when they get married.
Yeah, we got married in 1989. Sam was still in college. I was a couple years out and working, and I had no student loan debt, and Sam had no student loan debt, which was a big help. That student loan debt, didn't seem to be such a big thing in the 80s as it is now. I didn't really know many people that took out loans back then. I know there were some, but so I had a little bit of credit card debt when we were engaged, probably maybe $800, something around there. We paid that off. Sam was working part-time and going to school full-time when we were first married. We saved her part-time salary just in case. Got pregnant on her honeymoon, and she got pregnant on her honeymoon. And so we never lived on more than just one salary. We just, from the beginning, we never used what money she was making. We just saved it and got used to living on mine. And then, so we started from a good financial position. We weren't making any money though. My first bank job out of college in '87, I made $13,500. So $13,500 was my annual salary working at the bank.
Wow.
We're so old.
I don't know what that would equate to now, but it wasn't a lot of money. And when we got married, I was probably making under 20, close to 20, but in the $18,000 to $20,000 range when we got married and started having children.
Wow. And you're right.
So we got used to living frugally.
Yes. Well, and two, I think it's crazy how much things have increased and so quickly over the last decade even. I mean, when I started working, I was earning like $8.36 10 years ago at Target. That was like one of my college jobs. And now those kids are making at least $15 an hour. And I think, how is that possible? I had one of the highest salaries, but I had one of the highest hourly wages for those working out on the floor. And so it's just crazy to me to see how much, and it hasn't even kept up with inflation. So for families who are struggling right now, what have you learned over the years? Like, I have two questions, I guess. What are some of the things you did wrong early on, if there were any? And what were the most important things that you did correctly that set you on this trajectory?
You want to start?
Well, I think that you have to decide what your family's goals are. And that's where the title, came from, where each family has to decide where they want to pinch pennies so they can live more. Like, what is spending less to one family to live more to one family? Our spending less was on everything possible in our live more was so I could be a stay-at-home mom. And since I got pregnant on my honeymoon, and then when our daughter was 6 months old, I got pregnant again, our goal was, what can we do? Where can we save money so that we can continue for me to stay home? And we also opened our own business at that time. So it was a lot of juggling. We of course, spent as little as possible at the grocery store. We didn't go out to eat. We didn't go on fancy vacations. We had a simple car. We didn't have, our savings was going to just paying the monthly bills. And then we did things like, buy groceries they were called ends and pieces back then, but we would go to the butcher at the end of the day and get whatever lunch meat, whatever was left, and they'd sell it for super cheap. We would eat simply. We would buy bulk. Rob ate lunch for about 2 years, 2 sandwiches a day and a piece of fruit. And the sandwiches consisted of like mayonnaise, mustard, 1 piece of cheese, and 1 piece of lunch meat. And that was just the way it worked, because we were willing to do whatever we possibly could to, save money. I used cloth diapers. Our trips were to the parks. We didn't ever eat out. We didn't hit fast food joints with the kids. We would do things like libraries and parks and play groups and events at church. So whatever was free, we participated in.
And it might sound like not fun to people, but I don't remember us feeling deprived and it was also harder to spend money back then. You actually had to get in a car and drive to a Walmart or a Target and get out and go find stuff instead of clicking online and, spending $100 easily on Amazon in a few minutes.
We believe strongly in community, and in different stages of our life, that has been huge. Of course, family, community. Rob's parents lived close to us at that time. We would go to Rob's dad's house once a week for dinner, which was a real big deal. His dad would take us out to eat every once in a while. So we actually did get to go to restaurants and things. But we had family friends down the road. We must have eaten at their house 2 or 3 times a week, because I just had a little baby and was pregnant. And so living in that community, we would pray with them. We would have meals with them. And then again, we had this business. We owned a Christian bookstore. And so while Rob was working that, I would hang out with them. We also had an amazing group of older couples who they all were just having their last child. So who we hung out with, they were ones who were teaching me how to be a mom and teaching Rob how to be a dad. And we would do events for church and parties, All Saints Day parties and baby showers and all the type of events. We had community with these amazing people.
Yeah. You mentioned people are struggling now. If they are, one of the first things I would suggest is get a view of your finances. Don't be afraid to write everything down. List all your debt, list all your income. Sometimes it's, nerve-wracking or intimidating. You don't want to list, all different credit cards or loan payments from other things, or baby formula you got to buy, or diapers, but it's just a good idea to get a basic overview of what you owe and what you have coming in, and do a simple basic budget can be easy to do. And also, Sam mentioned community. We're fortunate. We've lived in this town since the 60s. We have over 50 years. Both of us grew up here, and we've never moved really more than, we lived in this 10-mile radius our whole lives, basically. Sam, we live quarter mile from the house Sam grew up in, and a couple miles from the house I grew up in. So we've known, especially the extrovert here, know a lot of people in town and our church community and homeschool community and different things like that. So there's plenty of people that everybody helps everybody, lends people stuff, borrows stuff, does stuff together.
So we saved money in places like we never had to buy our kids clothes. We used cloth diapers. Really, groceries, and when gas wasn't a real big deal because we didn't really go anywhere. And our house was simple. You know, we didn't have to fix anything up. Pretty much the only thing we spent money on was food.
Yeah, food still is our biggest expense. Once we got probably half a dozen kids, our food bill is more than our mortgage because we bought, we're in our third house. We bought basic houses. Now we're in a large house, but it was a foreclosure we bought. And when we buy that? 22 years ago. Yeah. And fixed it up. So it was a good deal. We bought it, spring of 2000. Fixed it up. Yeah,
my mom always taught us to buy the worst house in the nicest neighborhood. So we're living in a really nice neighborhood. The house was foreclosed on. It was pretty much our dream property. It was on the end of a court, has woods behind it, perfect for raising kids, surrounded by amazing families. And we just bought it. And again, we moved in and made the house livable. We didn't go in and build our dream kitchen and take out a loan to build, to fix out the bathrooms really nice. It was like all white paint, all white fixtures. And then as the years went by, we would save money and fix up things, to be a little bit more fancy or to meet our growing family. So I guess our kind of go-to was just living simply and trusting that God would provide whatever we needed. And it's, when we first got married, we were open to whatever God's will was, whether it was one child or 10 children, or whether it was, having our own business or us living in this particular town. But everything, God just has met every need. And we kind of laugh because, God didn't say, oh, I'm going to find you this foreclosure in 20 years, or I'm going to get you this great used van, or someone's going to give you the dining room table that has 10 leaves in it. And someone's going to give you a new bike for your kids. Like all these things, whether it's small or large, like our kids have learned to trust and to see it in play. People bringing us meals when we had babies. I mean, everything, every time we ever thought we were going to have to figure something out budget wise, something always came through, whether it was a refund in the mail or, again, the community that we lived in, helping us buy. But again, it wasn't like we were like banging on the doors on the side of the road, holding a sign like, I have 10 kids, give me money for food. We never have done that. We've never had to utilize like anything more than just the community that we're in.
Yeah. We do have, the community, she mentioned the meals. I mean, it's the main reason we had kids and got pregnant was the meal trains. People bring us our meals every couple of days for a couple of months. You don't have to cook.
Our town is known for like, if you ever like have a baby or someone's sick or your husband loses a job or someone dies, like it's like instantaneous. It's like everybody hits the meal train and what can I bring? And we thought that was just the way it was everywhere. And when we did the Washington Post article, people were horrible. The comments were horrible. Like, oh, these people are just living off their church and community and taking couches off of people's corner of their yards. And we're like, oh my gosh, I'm sorry you don't live in a nice town like we do. Like anytime we've needed anything between Free Cycle or my neighborhood or just my friends on Facebook, it has been provided down to like the pair of size 7 black church shoes. It's like every single thing we've needed has been taken care of. And it's more of trust as it is like begging.
Right. And I always think it's ironic too, because these are the same people who would say that being eco-conscious and eco-friendly is like a high virtue. And like, you're doing it, you're doing it. You're recycling for your family and a lot of these people, they have 1 or 2 kids and then they get rid of all this like practically new stuff. And you're willing to accept their used things because it's, it's still in relatively great condition. It would be a waste for it to get thrown away.
Yeah. We pull it out of their trash if we see it.
Or usually because because there's so many of us, I constantly will get like phone calls, emails, messages on Facebook, text messages from people saying, hey, I know somebody in your house could use this bike. I know someone in your house is a size 4.5 cleat. You know, I know somebody in your house would want this skateboard or needs a single bed, or my mother-in-law just died and we have this, you know, whole new dishes and kitchen set. And I heard your son's buying a house, and every single detail has been taken care of. And we've never been too proud to accept it. And if I don't use it, I usually know someone who does. I also have the list of people saying, hey, Sam, when someone messages you and we need a new car, or we're looking for, you know, size 3 clothes for my daughter because we had a son ahead of her and she doesn't have any hand-me-downs. So, I mean, we're always networking and working together. And that's what this, you know, community is all about, whether it's your church community or your sports community or your family, whatever it is, whatever your niche is, then that's where you have to find support. And you give back.
Yes.
Like now we're the older couple. So now it's our turn to, you know, run over. I got a phone call the other day, you know, one of our friends with 5 little kids, one of their sons had to go to the emergency room and all her kids were in bed. So it was my turn to run over there and sit and hang out at her house, where things like that happen to us all the time. And we always had friends and family to help us out. Or can you pick my kid up from, you know, this particular event, or can you take my kid to soccer practice, or can you take my kid to, you know, ballet, whatever. You just have to learn to ask. I mean, it's definitely not it's definitely my gift. You know, people are like, what's your talent? And mine's like connecting and networking and finding purpose.
You would make a great fundraiser. Oh my goodness. Yeah, because people hate asking for things. That is a very unique skill. So props to you.
And it's hard, but you have to say, if it means me having to go to work and leave my children, I will do whatever it took to get to stay home. And we did. And then when Rob started making more money and we got a different job, we just kept living simply. So it wasn't like, oh, now we make $10 extra a month, I can go out and buy ice cream and paper towels. No, we just kept living simply and kept looking for the sales and networking at the grocery store. Like my mom said, always become friends with the butcher. So I would go to the butcher and say, hey, when do you mark down the meat, or when do you have sales? And they would actually come and find me and say, hey, did you see that we have all this meat marked down today? Or at 7:30 every morning on Tuesdays is when we mark down the meat. Just, you know, get first come, first serve. And it wasn't meat that went bad. It was meat that was going to go bad, or at least bad in the sense of the expiration date the next day. So we had 24 hours to either cook it, eat it, or freeze it. And we have done that. You know, in the good old days before COVID, when there was more excess of food and things, I would be driving through the grocery store with like a cartload of meat, and people would be like, hey, I'm going to the barbecue at your house. And wow, and the grocers would be like, oh, don't you know that's a lady with 14 kids? Like she's got 2 freezers. And, you know, or I would come home and Rob and I would be like, okay, let's put this in marinade and let's cook this and let's freeze this. And, you know, let's have a bunch of people over for dinner for this, you know. So you just have to learn how to manage, and to every particular store, whether it's, you know, whatever your typical store is that you go to. We also have Lidl and Aldi right down the street. So we canceled our big box store because we were finding just as much good deals at those stores.
Yeah. That's probably more important even now. The meat and stuff has gotten so expensive. So being able to find good sales on the groceries.
Yes, and go find a good farmer.
With, you know, the prices going up.
Yeah, my in-laws, they raise beef, so we are extremely blessed. We just actually picked up a quarter of beef this past weekend, and my husband hunts, so, you know, we have tons of venison still from last year, and we had friends that were pig farmers, so we had pork for a long time, too. I mean, I think being able to find those resources and, like you said, trust, because God will surprise people in amazing ways. Like I mean, you've talked about all the random things that people have given you pretty much right at the moment that you needed them. I mean, I think it was after I had our fourth kiddo, we were trying to figure out how we were going to fit all the car seats in the van because, as you know, it gets really hard when you have a bunch of kids close together to find the perfect arrangement so everyone can fit in there safely. and
not kill each other in the car seats.
and so that maybe you're not having to climb into the back row to get them in there perfectly too, and all that stuff. It's a lot of work.
Because usually you're pregnant.
Exactly. So all of a sudden, I think it was a couple of days after I had our fourth, I got a text message from someone from our parish saying, hey, we have this van, and I don't know, I was just praying and God really put it on my heart to reach out to you to see if you guys were in need of a new van. And I thought, oh my goodness, like, yeah, we could have technically maybe made it work, but it would have been very difficult for me to climb back in there, even postpartum, and, you know, get everyone buckled in. And I thought, oh my goodness, how generous. This is a wonderful van, the other van that we had. And not that we could technically afford something more expensive if we wanted to make payments every month or something. I think, you know, but we just didn't want to do that. And I was willing to get the crappiest red van that we called it the Red Rocket. And it was just this beat up van. And and it was embarrassing. I'm sure a lot of women would have been embarrassed to drive it, but I didn't care. I was like, I've got a van my kids can climb in. All I need to do is open up the doors and they'll get in their seats. You know, that was my priority. That was my living more was I don't have to open the doors for them and they can climb in. I don't have to hoist every kid up into the van. So, you know, I think going to that point, like, how has Scripture formed your guys' view on how to handle finances? Because that's a major component too.
Yeah. One way, just realizing that whether it's money or possessions or anything that, you know, everything belongs to God. So if you have that mindset of, you know, you're just the steward of it, and you're called to be a good steward of your money, your time, talents, anything like that. It just helps you mentally, I would say, realize that, you know, God's in control. Everything is His. So you don't, and also I guess we should mention St. Joseph because we use St. Joseph in a good way. We St. Joseph a lot, you know, especially financial related things. Always tell people, pray to St. Joseph, ask St. Joseph.
We had a Suburban, so I just remember trying to crawl in the back, get the kids buckled, and I was pregnant, and even though it was a great car, it just wasn't working for us with our fifth one on the way. And then we got a prison van. Talk about being embarrassing. This thing had like prison numbers on the top of the van. So Rob used to say, you can't run away. I'll get the helicopters to find, 6274 on the highway heading north or whatever. So it was clunky, noisy, had no air conditioning. That's why we got it, because the poor prisoners couldn't have a car without air conditioning. And the kids loved it. It was like our big, huge, noisy van. And it was great because they loved the fact that we could take other kids with us. And it was like our wonderful, huge, bus. And as homeschoolers, that was exciting.
And you're not worried about kids wrecking it. It's like people buy these really nice vehicles and then they put tiny kids in there. It's like, why would you do that?
Yeah.
Do you hate yourself?
Yeah, this had like rubber mat type of floor where you can hose it down.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it didn't have the leg shackles still. We were hoping it had leg shackles and plexiglass, but that had been removed.
That is so funny.
But it was important, the kids, I love that, especially now that we have older kids. And our older children are all very financially responsible. And they also know that, God provides. And they'll be like, they even call me, hey, Mom, can you see if you know anybody who has this? Or I need lamps, or I need whatever for their new houses. they grew up seeing, people walk in bringing us meals after a baby, people leaving stuff on the front porch. And I remember my son needing new cleats. And before I went out and bought him some, we had the email with the soccer team about, practice is this time. And I just replied back to the email group, hey, anybody have an old pair of cleats that they don't need, size, 7.5. And I got so many replies, and my son was not embarrassed at all. He was so excited because he got like $80 cleats instead of $12.99 ones that I was going to buy him. And he was so great because everybody else had brand new cleats and were getting blisters. And his was like, wow, worn in and comfortable. And the leather's molding around my feet. He was so excited, and he ran home and he showed all his big brothers, look at the cleats I got. They all oohed and awed like, wow. But all it took was a little humbling, and just to ask. I have this little saying when I give talks to like young moms, and they're like, well, how do we do this? How do we do this? I said, just remember my name. Sam stands for simplify, save, sales, sassy, sacrifice. When we were writing this book, it was all during Lent. So suffering. And then A stands for ask for help. Always trust God. And again, teaching these women to ask is really hard because not everybody has, they feel they don't want to impose, or they don't want to, be embarrassed. And then M, of course, Mother Mary, and then make do, make a plan. We tell our kids, you don't need a new pair of cleats. The ones you have are fine. Make do with what you have. And, make do with the kitchen. We had, our kitchen was really old and outdated, but we made do with it until finally the duct tape wouldn't hold it together anymore. But just changing your mindset. Social media is so hard because women and children, everyone's looking at the new and improved kitchen or the new and improved car, or the fancy vacations, people posting pictures of all these things, or even college. Like I just see kids going in farther and farther debt. And it seems like when I was in college, a 4-year degree was a big deal. But now you have to have like a master's, or you have to take all these extra classes, or you have to have this on top of that. It's like continually squeezing these people their money out. It's like, this
oh my goodness. Yeah. The
ridiculous
fact that
what people are
you
going
have
through.
to take like gender studies classes. Like, what does that have to do with anything? Why do I have to take this stupid class that why do I have to pay for this? I remember thinking that too at my 4-year college, just thinking this is dumb. And I really didn't make any, there were no illusions with the professor that I disagreed with pretty much everything that she had to teach. But, it's like, if I have to sit here, then I guess this is how it's going to be. But you're right. It's like we're all going into debt. And when my husband and I got married, I was the one with student loan debt. He went to school and was pretty much paid to go to trade school. And he lived with his parents' best friends. So he lived in a different town, and then would go to his trade school. And then he was also he had gotten like state scholarship funds. So he didn't pay anything to go to school. It was all paid for. And then he had some left over too. And then he was working on top of that. So yeah, he was the one that had it all figured out. He bought our house when he was 21 years old, the house that we lived in when we first got married. And I was the one that I was drowning in student loan debt because I spent my first year at a private college and then transferred when I realized that it was not a financially good investment, and spent the next 3 years just trying to get my degree. And now I'm a stay-at-home mom, It's like, we have it paid off, thankfully. But yeah, it was a long road to get there, and we didn't enjoy having that debt. So for people who are maybe not in a good place financially right now, I'm sure you've counseled other people on like where to get started. I know, Rob, you mentioned looking at all of your finances. But what happens when you're that person who looks at your finances and it is absolutely overwhelming how much debt you are in and how much little you're bringing in. Like, what would you say to that person who feel like it's totally insurmountable?
Okay. Well, I mean, start with prayer, I think, but we've mentioned that, ask St. Joseph for help. Sometimes you can't cut any more out of all the fat's cut out of your budget. You're eating peanut butter sandwiches because you can't afford jelly. You're, using day old bread. You can't cut anymore. Sometimes you may just have to make more money. I've worked 2 jobs before. I worked a second job when we were engaged. I was working at the bank, and then I would drive to a gas station, and this is when you used to pump gas, and work from 6 till midnight a few nights a week pumping gas to get, so we could save money for, when we were getting married. Now, I'm not suggesting you have to do that. We weren't married yet, and we didn't have any children. So, I don't want to tell dads to spend, more time away from their children and their spouses and make it more difficult, but you may have to, or find, some type of side thing you can do from home, or, maybe if you're married, maybe your spouse can figure out a way to make some money. We went through a phase right before we paid off our house 10 years ago. Yeah. And right around that time, one of the things we were doing was we just had so much stuff, after years of marriage. I started selling anything that wasn't nailed down on eBay. And over about a 2 year, I didn't do it like full time or anything. I was working, I would just post stuff here and there. But over 2 years, we sold $6,000 worth of stuff. Just because we had so much stuff. We
didn't even miss it. I was like, we would think there'd be like an empty room or something.
Yeah, the house was still cluttered. I don't know where it all came from, but I mean that not that everybody has all kinds of stuff all over. One of our sons, he loves flipping different things. He works full time, but he's into bikes and outdoor stuff, and he sells all kinds of things at a outdoor consignment store. He'll find things at garage sales or Goodwill or in the trash, clean them up, take them to a consignment store, or put them on Facebook Marketplace. I was over at his house Friday, and I saw him walking. I was driving to his house, and he comes walking down the side of the road. He had met somebody. He had a bike he had bought in April, fixed it up, and sold it to somebody, and biked it over to some church where they met, and he was walking back from the church on the shoulder of the road to get back to his house. But what probably wasn't a ton of money, but it was a bike he'd fixed up, spent maybe $100, $150 on it, and sold it for $300. Just so, and he does stuff like that all the time. He's constantly buying and selling. He'll buy lots of bikes from police auctions, 20, 30 bikes at a time, clean them up. Especially the last 2 years, there's been a high demand for used bikes and a bike shortage with everybody trying to get outside. Crazy government locked us down for that Chinese flu thing. So
that's such.
Just really working with it, and like whether it's.
I was just gonna say.
Just like taking it, I would.
Sorry, I know there's a little bit of a delay.
Yes, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I love that you're bringing up having multiple income streams, because I think that so often gets overlooked. I mean, often people say, well, maybe I should look for a higher paying job or something. And sometimes that can be useful, but it's also beneficial if you're trying to build wealth to have multiple income streams coming in. And I love how creative like your son is getting. I know my in-laws, like I said, they're farmers, so they raise beef, but they also do crops and stuff, of course. But they've had to get really creative too, because they haven't been making any money on crops the last couple of years, and beef sales are, through the roof right now, but you can only raise so much beef at a time. So they've been buying hay out of state and bringing it in and delivering it to people, and they're turning such a huge profit. They're going to auctions and fixing things up from old farmers, major machines or whatever, and they're turning a huge profit on that. So they've had to get really, they've had to adapt quite a bit how they do their farm work and manage the farm, because they have all these new streams of income coming in. But it's helped them survive the last few years when farmers have really been, they've been really forgotten about. So, and I know you were going to say something too, Sam, so I'd love to hear that.
I was just going to say, every once in a while we would watch a friend's kid, or, for a short-term time, or Rob would mow lawns, and simple things like that, especially now with all the technology. Working from home is so easy. And I think the world saw that during the pandemic, which, also brings me down to something else. Like, I think the pandemic, one of the few things I thought was positive from that is that so many families who weren't living debt-free like us realize that they don't have to go out to eat at a restaurant once or twice a week. They don't have to swing by the fast food restaurant after soccer practice, before ballet, on the way to the movies. Like, so many people realize, like, hey, our kids don't need to be constantly entertained. We don't have to take them to all these fancy places. There are so many free things, parks and hikes, and, playing in the yard, or letting the kids play with all the toys that you bought them. Like, kids all of a sudden were realizing that they weren't going to die if they didn't have soccer practice, Boy Scout lessons, piano lessons, whatever, ballet, all the things that people were running around stressing their families out with, they weren't doing. And people were embracing family meals again. I mean, family meals are huge. It's like a win-win. It saves you money. It blesses your family. It's such good for your kids. It's so good for your family not to be running around. Like, making that a priority again is going to change so much. We also have known lots of people who, because of college debt, either didn't have another child or didn't get to join the vocation of their choice, like whether it was to join the priesthood or the convent or be missionaries. We had 2 sons who chose to be focused missionaries because they graduated pretty much debt-free. The older one graduated totally debt-free. So it wasn't like, oh no, my parents paid all this money for me to go to college. I can't just be a missionary for 2 years and not make money. And the other one was just minimal debt. And it wasn't like, oh no, I can't be open to God's will calling me to do this mission work because I need to go and, make tons of money. One of the missionaries this year had like a 6-figure job was offered to her, and she turned it down to become a missionary, instead of being like, well, the responsible thing to do would be to go and, start working because my parents paid all this money for my college, or other people's, I need to work because I built up all this debt from college. So I think people need to rethink this whole, the system. Our kids all go to community college for 2 years, and then they go to a state school so that they either can commute and save money, or they're paying in-state tuition. We would love for our kids to be able to go to, some of these amazing Catholic private schools, but that hasn't, so far, our first 10 have done the community college and the state school route. And then they join these great, focused Catholic missionary programs at the Newman Center or whatever. But really, people don't think about debt affecting a person's vocations, because convents and priesthood, like, they won't take you in if you have debt. Maybe you can get someone to fund it for you or whatever, but that's a huge deal. Or having another child. I mean, we're all for people being responsible, and we don't think everybody should have 14 children, but we also have been able to be, I don't know how much you know about our story with our last 2 kids. We've given birth to 12, but when number 13 came around, we just got a phone call saying from a pregnancy support network saying, hey, there's this 12-week-old child who needs help for about, 3 to 6 months. Would you be willing to take one in? Well, Rob said yes, of course, right away. He didn't have to think, well, we can barely feed the kids we already have, or we hardly are responsible enough because we have to pay all these bills. We could say yes to God right away. And then 4 years later, we got email this time saying there was a little baby that was going to be born and needed a place to stay for a year. Again, Rob's like, yes, because we were financially stable. We didn't owe tons of money to anybody. And so we were open to doing the will of God and being open to life, even though I wasn't giving birth. We could still help.
I love that.
Those things that pro-lifers, we don't do.
Yeah.
Supposedly we don't take care of babies after.
Well, and I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I did want to touch on your adoption story, because you're right. People talk about how the financial aspect of adoption is one of the biggest reasons people don't adopt, which actually isn't true. I mean, there are more parents waiting to adopt than there are kids being placed for adoption. That's a fact. But the reality is that there is a lot of money involved. I mean, we have friends also that have adopted, and that's been a difficult journey for them. So I love that you talk about the freedom that it gives you to be debt-free, to answer God's call for your life. So what has it been like for you guys then? What was it like when you realized you had no debt and you were not enslaved by any debt whatsoever? And you could, because you guys are have you maintained being debt-free pretty much from the beginning? Have you guys ever had any significant debt?
The only debt we've had is a mortgage. When we got married, we were debt-free, and we bought a townhouse, and we're in our third house now. So we had a mortgage on the different houses we've lived in, and then 2012, we paid off the house we're in. It was the foreclosure we bought. So we paid it off in about just over 12 years. It was we were doing a 15-year payment schedule, and advanced it a little bit, and then just finally got rid of it. And so we never had car loans, or we never carried a credit card balance, never had student loans for our kids or anything like that. And then for the last 10 years, we've had zero debt since
what
the house
was that
paid
like?
off.
What has that been like?
And it feels good. It was nice for me, but she was more excited probably.
I was in shock. I had no idea. Rob hands me this piece of paper. He takes me out front. He's like, I want to talk to you. So he hands me this piece of paper, and I was like, what is this? And he said,
wasn't something bad.
He said, read it. And I'm like, I don't understand what this says. He says, I paid off our house. I was like, what? Oh my gosh, that's amazing. I mean, because the generation that we grew up in, my parents had this sign right by the phone. It said, God bless our mortgaged home. And when my parents would pay off their house, it was like this huge big deal, like kill the fatted calf, invite all the neighbors over. It was a huge deal because it was unheard of. And I was just like, how did you do that? Like, I was so happy. I was so proud. And then for a second, I was like, wait a minute. I've been like scraping 2 pennies together and trying to, what kind of meat can we afford, and spending an hour in front of the grocery store meat department trying to figure out what's on sale and what can we afford. But, using cloth diapers, all those things. But then again, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so great. And Rob is very quiet and humble. And I am like, I wanted to take out a billboard. My husband paid off our house. This is so amazing. Not because I wanted to be cocky, but because I wanted every single person who ever looked at us and said, how can they afford to have another kid? How can they afford to, to take care of those children? How can they possibly, not have like 3 jobs, or how can she possibly be a stay-at-home mom? I wanted the whole world to know that if you just entrust your entire family to Jesus and to the Sacred Heart and Immaculate Heart of Mary, like, God will bless you and all those promises come true. We never had to ask for a loan from anybody. I mean, we always knew that, like, if for some strange, horrible reason something happened, of course God would take care of us and our families would help. But we never had to do that. We just kept trusting, and you have to be responsible. I mean, we can't trust God with our finances and then go to McDonald's every day, or go out to eat, or tell the kids, sure, let's go to the movies, or let's go on vacation and, spend all this money and go to Disney World or something. I mean, we had to work for it. And we had to make God realize that we are appreciative for what we had. So I was just so happy. So Rob would be like, oh, you don't usually, people don't talk about money, but I'm like, I want to tell these people, like, listen, I have been a stay-at-home mom for, 33 years, and my husband is retired now. I mean, the fact that, on top of paying off our house, now he's retired. People are like, how is that possible? And we live in the DC area, which is one of the most expensive places to live. And it's just like, we just trust God and we don't overspend. Like, our kids know that if they ever get to go to a restaurant, when Rob takes them out for their birthday, I mean, it's a huge, big deal. We want people to realize how important it is to raise your children to appreciate things, not expect things.
Yes.
Like, even our son the other day, I took them kind of camping, and I went out and I bought them nets. And they were like, oh my gosh, Mom, thank you so much. I was like, these are like $4 nets. Who cares? And my son's like, it's okay, Mom. I don't really need one. I'll let, I bought 3, one for each of the little boys. He's like, can you take this back? You didn't have to spend $3.75 on this. It wasn't, I was like, no, this is your treat. Like, to raise them to the $3.75 net is going to be like, wow, thanks so much. I mean, our kids have all the things. Like, our kids, they don't dress in rags. They have fancy stuff. They all get jobs as soon as they're old enough. If they want to have the fancy jerseys or the fancy shoes or the fancy clothes, then they get jobs and they work their tails off. I mean, all of our kids have bought their own cars before they were 16. We have, our older children are all responsible, 5 of which own at least, 5 own houses. 1 owns 4 houses. 1 owns 2 houses. I mean, it wasn't anything we taught them other than live within your means. I mean, that was unthought of and so unheard of nowadays.
Yeah. I want the record to show that she called me humble earlier in this conversation.
Yes.
She's never said that in 33 years of marriage. I'll
make sure to pull that clip out and just send it to you. You can keep it.
There you go. I'll keep replaying it to her.
You just have to realize, though, I mean, he is amazing. Like, he does all the work. But the fact that, like, again, people say, how did you go from making, $18,000 a year, having our own business, to making, maybe $10,000 more than that? How did you do that? And I said, I wasn't even like we made any extra money. We just still kept buying groceries on sale. Like, if the kids would be like, oh, Mom bought paper towels, we must be millionaires. Like, you just learn to live simply.
So funny.
It's not real. And it's not like we're like making our own.
No, but you're using
paper
towels,
We're not really living. I know. We're not living crazy. Like, we are like, people come over to our house and like, oh, your house doesn't look like you guys have 14 kids here. I'm like, what did you expect? Us to be like sitting on boxes and eating lentils every meal? Like, we're just normal, regular, crazy people with 14 kids, like, who live debt free. It's not like we, have all the strange, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and she mentioned, when I would get raises or a better paying job, we didn't have, I call it lifestyle creep. We basically lived the same, but I would up the percentage I put into my 401k, started IRA for Sam. I already had an IRA, different things. We would increase our savings. And as she mentioned, this past November, I retired right before my 57th birthday. How old am I?
Yeah.
I don't know. I retired right before my 57th birthday. I think I'm 57.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay. 57. Yeah. So last November we retired.
So that was after we wrote the book. So that was like a whole nother level of like, now we can invest into these younger children and our grandchildren. And again, just keep living simply. We didn't have a lifestyle change when he retired. We just had to continue being prudent. And, I had to stop going to the thrift store every day and buying my grandchildren presents, but it's okay because we know how to do this. Like, it's simple living. It's not rocket science.
Yeah, there's a secular podcast. You can afford anything, which is pretty good. The point being that I could go out today in theory and buy a Corvette and afford the payment and the insurance. We would have to cut back in other areas, and it wouldn't be good for our financial future. But I mean, the thing is prioritizing what you want, because we can afford, like, our kids are like, well, can we do this? I'm like, no, we can't do that. Well, we can't afford it. I'm like, yes, we can afford it, but it's not a priority. We can do some fun, frivolous things, but we're not going to, every day is not going to be, just blowing money frivolously, but you can still have fun. You can buy the nets she bought. You can go on we go on vacation. We do stuff. We don't,
But my kids will go on vacation and we'll be like, can we get ice cream cones on the boardwalk? And I'm like, okay. So they're $4 a cone. And my kids are like, we could go to the Aldi and each get our own gallon for that much. So, I mean, yes, sometimes it's nice to get that ice cream on the boardwalk and appreciate it instead of being like, I didn't like this flavor. I didn't like this one. I'm like so grateful. But again, just when we've met so many families and are, giving these talks throughout different parishes and things that, spend less and live more. We have met so many families who spend less and work hard to pay for Catholic school education, which is a lot of money. We have other ones who, one couple had 8 kids and they were homeschooling and spending less on education so they could buy all organic food. So you just have to you have to look at your family. You have to trust, not only trust in God, but trust each other. I trust that Rob is obviously doing a great job with our finances, and he has to trust me that I'm not going to go out and,
Where do we bank? What's the name of our bank?
Chase.
No.
Shoot. I've been trying to work on this. He always asks me where we bank.
The point's not to embarrass her. Well, maybe a little bit. The point is the trust thing. I worked in banking. I like numbers. I enjoy it. I know a lot of people hate it. So, doing budget annoys them. So I've always handled all the finances, and, Sam trusts me to do that. That's why she doesn't know the name of our bank. She doesn't know.
So I went with like 7 families. We all went to the beach for the day. And all the kids were having a blast. We go to the beach to go to the beach. We don't go to the beach to, go on the rides. We don't go to the beach to go to miniature golfing or to go to the water slides. We go to the beach to play on the sand in the free water. Okay. And my kids love it. Like, why wouldn't you go to the beach for that reason? So we were at the beach with all these families, and a mom was taking a bunch of kids to the popcorn place to go buy really fancy popcorn. And I was like, oh gosh, I love that popcorn. That would be fun. But I brought just the amount of money to get dinner on the way home. And she's like, well, there's an ATM machine right next to the popcorn place. And I was like, I don't know how to use an ATM machine. She's like, no wonder you live debt free. Rob is so blessed to have you as a wife that you don't even know you're 53 years old and you don't know how to use an ATM machine. I was like, I've never needed to.
But it's good. It's so
that's
good.
Not
though,
for everybody. But
like, even actually, I was in a conversation with my father-in-law, and he is so proud of all of his children, but he is also extremely proud of our family. He, I think, sees us very similarly to him and my mother-in-law. They had 5 kids very quickly, very young, and they've worked really hard and continue to do so. Of course, they're farmers. But my husband on Father's Day texted his dad and said, "Happy Father's Day. Thanks for saying no." And my father-in-law and I were just talking about it recently, and that meant so much to him. He goes, "None of my kids have ever said that to me, but I know that saying no is the right answer a lot of the time." He goes, "I didn't enjoy saying no all the time, but we were poor. They were dairy farmers. Like, they had no money." And I think our children learn to work really hard when we encourage them to work hard and we show them what that looks like. I think there's a mindset in a lot of parents that they don't want their children to work as hard as maybe they did when they were young. And so they kind of let their kids, and there's something to letting there's something to letting your children be children. But part of our duties as parents is to disciple them so that when they get older and they're ready to move out, they know how to manage their lives in every aspect, so that they're prepared. And often I find that parents, and I was one of those children where even though I worked from the time I was 15, I didn't really know much about managing money or anything like that. So even though I didn't really have a lot of debt until I went into college and I worked, I knew how to work hard, but I was spending my money on gas and clothes and going out with friends and stuff. But I wish I had known more about how to manage my finances when I graduated high school instead of like now, which is way later than it should have been, right? So saying no, I think that's really important.
I have no idea.
By Angelus.
Those are Angelus alarm. It's noon here. But go ahead.
For
Sorry.
You. Well, we can actually wrap it up. Where can people find out more about you guys?
Well, I do love what you just said, though, and God bless your husband and his dad, because I do believe that one of the worst things you can do to your child is to spoil them.
Yes.
And I can attest to one thing we never realized what we were doing is we have raised amazing spouses. So our children who are married are pretty amazing, and their spouses are like, wow, they're like so low maintenance.
Yes.
I don't need a fancy car. I don't need a fancy vacation. I don't need a fancy wedding or house. My son last night said the average wedding now costs $60,000. Our two daughters did it for $5,000. It's like, where?
My husband paid for most of our wedding,
and it's hindering a marriage.
Yeah,
right. It's hindering a marriage right now because one of my sons is like, it's cost $60,000 to get married. So it's like, that's crazy. So don't spoil your children. Keep saying no. But yes to God. No to the fancy vacations and the 500
100%
activities.
Agree with you. So you guys have a website where people can learn more about you guys. You guys are at fatzfam.com, FATZFAM.com, right? And then you have your book. Is there anywhere else that people can connect with you guys?
So I'm on Facebook and on Instagram, so people can send me personal questions, ask me, because again, finances is different for every family. It's hard to kind of blanket a conversation on finances. And Rob does Twitter.
Beware.
For better or worse.
I am.
You've seen some of my Twitter comments.
When he's not getting kicked off.
When I'm not banned, you can find me on @FatsFam on Twitter.
And I'm on Sam JMJ on Instagram and Sam Lancaster Fatzinger.
Excellent. Thank you so much for coming on today. I appreciate you guys taking the time to try again. And happy birthday to your kiddo.
I hope it worked.